Alright, check. SCP-XXX first appearance. The SCP was created in a village near the Black Forest in Germany. The Foundation discovered the SCP in a forest near the cities of Billings, Montana. They had been living in a wooden cabin before capture. They claim that death itself created them. Interviews will follow up on this claim. The SCP is 8 foot tall with a humanoid appearance. They are unnaturally skinny and sport a black cotton suit with a white undershirt, black tie, black dress shoes, and a black belt. The SCP's skin is rough and has an off-white, almost gray hue. They have sunken spots where their eyes would be, and an oval-shaped head with a defined jawline. They are completely hairless and very bony. Despite their skinny appearance, the SCP has a lot more physical strength than one would think. The SCP also has 8 thin black tendrils producing from their back, used for grabbing items or used as weapons. Subject class is Keter. This first story is taken from a woman who, at 8 years old, had an encounter with SCP-XXX SlenderMan. This is her story.
My name is Kelsey Baxter. Growing up in Montana had its perks. Me and my family lived 20 miles out in the country. My encounter with this creature started one day after school. Since we lived so far out, instead of riding the bus, my mom had to come pick me up. On her way, there's this road that is surrounded by trees and has little to no traffic ever. I was daydreaming out the window when I caught a glimpse of a tall, faceless man in a black suit, way out in the trees. At first, I had thought I was imagining it, but just a few minutes later, I saw it again, but closer. I hadn't gotten the feeling of danger when I saw him. I was honestly more intrigued, which was weird because I wanted to be scared, but there was something almost drawing me towards him. We had gotten home, and for the rest of the day, I didn't see him. It wasn't until night when I was playing in my room and I heard a tapping on my window. I got up on my bed and went to take a look out my window, and on the tree line, probably 20 feet from our yard, I saw him again, just staring at me. At that moment, I didn't know how to describe the feeling, but now I'm older, it was the feeling of dread and loneliness. I knew that for some reason I was feeling what he was feeling, and I felt bad for him. Almost like an intense feeling to go help him. That night I slept, I had the most vivid dream of him. It was me in the woods, looking for him. Mist had clouded the ground, all while I kept hearing a faint whisper, saying help. The next morning I woke up and went straight outside, and it was probably 6 o'clock a.m. I saw him right there in the same spot along the tree line. So I ran to him, and he vanished. Being young and naive, I ran into the woods to look for him. But the spot where he was, I'd found a piece of paper with a drawing of a little girl in a window. It was a drawing of me looking at him from my bedroom. So I continued into the woods. Not a minute later, I saw him again. And as I did, I noticed it was getting hard to see. A steady mist was rolling in. I found another paper with a car, and me looking from the car at him. The paper said, "Help me." At that point, I was getting very scared. I felt a hate in the air, as if I was being judged or something wanted to hurt me. So I started to walk backwards, and when I did, I bumped into what I thought was a tree, but it was him. I turned and saw his pale face and screamed as I started to run away, opposite of where he was. I kept yelling, "Help me." I ran, and that's when I tripped and had hit my head. I then woke up in my backyard, not knowing how much time had passed, and I was by the tree line with my dad shaking and started to pick me up. I told him what had happened, and of course, he hadn't believed me. But as he was carrying me inside, I was facing the woods, and I saw him again. I yelled, "There he is." My dad turned around and didn't see him. After that encounter, I started to draw him, and never stopped believing. And after time had passed, I had been on websites seeing that other people were having the same experience of seeing this tall creature.
This next story is taken from a boy who at 15 years old with his friends had an encounter with SCP-XXX. The boy was the sole survivor. This is his story.
My name is Richard Davison. I grew up in a small town in northern Pennsylvania. My encounter with this monster occurred on October 17th, 2010. Me and my friends like to explore the woods by our school. There's these old abandoned shacks littered throughout the area. Being young and dumb, we like to go and throw rocks through windows and graffiti on the shack itself. On this night in particular, we had gone deeper into the woods to try and find something new. Which we did. Probably 2 miles into the woods, we had found this old degraded cabin. My friend Sam had a very uneasy feeling about this place, saying he kept feeling like he was being watched. None of us felt the same, so we continued on and went inside. It was creepy and extremely old. On a desk in the cabin, there was a piece of old paper that had a drawing of a tall person and was scribbled, "Leave me alone." We all thought this was creepy when we heard what sounded like a dying animal outside. My friend Sam was frozen, staring out the window. I had shook him and said, "Sam, what's wrong?" He then pointed out the window. We all saw this tall, pale-faced man standing in the distance. At this point, it was getting late, and in PA around this time of year, it gets dark early. So it was getting dark and we decided to all book it back. When we all started to scramble out the door, Sam was still frozen and wouldn't move. We yelled, "Let's go, Sam," and he whispered, "If we run, we will all die." That shocked all of us, and we said, "What should we do then?" Sam just started crying and said, "Didn't you hear him?" None of us had heard anything. He said if we run, he will kill my little sister. Sam, he was still frozen, staring out the window. And before anything else could happen, the front door blew open as that tall monster was standing in the doorway. I ran and went right out the window and yelled, "Let's go, guys." Casey, Robert, and Sean were all right behind me, but Sam had stayed in the cabin. We heard a scream and I turned around. Sean said, "What are we doing? We gotta keep going." And then I yelled, "We can't just leave Sam." So I ran back and they hesitantly followed. The door was shut, and on it was another paper with a drawing that said, "Don't look, or it takes you." We slowly opened the door. In the quiet woods, all you could hear was the old door opening, and it felt as if time had slowed, as it revealed Sam lying on the ground, torn apart. Casey, at the sight of that, threw up immediately. At this point in the woods, it was getting dark, so we could barely see, especially since there was this fog rolling in. Sean pointed out that Sam was the first to see the monster. And that page we found said, "Don't look, or it takes you." So we all said to each other, "If we see or catch a glimpse, do not look at its face." We all then started to make our way back to the school, completely shook as to what happened. And we had no idea how to feel about it. As we were walking, it was quiet and so dark, you could barely see 5 feet in front of ourselves. That's when we heard a stick break to our left, and then Robert, who was on my right, I heard a gasp like he had been punched, and he was gone. We called out for him and he didn't respond. We didn't know what to do, we just kept walking, and a few paces later on a tree, we found another paper with "Can't run" scribbled on it. We were so scared, Sam and Robert were dead, and we just kept moving, staying close to one another. Honestly, we were lost. It was so dark and misty, we couldn't navigate. We just kept walking in a direction. And that's when we found another paper with "Always watches, no eyes" scribbled on it. Casey then started to freak out, saying, I'm sorry. And that's when we said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Guys, don't you hear him?" We said no, and he said, "Oh fuck," and started to run. After that, we started to run as well and tried to follow him, but he was gone. Sean and I were left. And that's when Sean said, "Look, it's Robert." And it was Robert. A little bit on the distance, we could kind of make it out. He was wearing a really bright red shirt. And when we got closer, it was Robert stabbed into a tree with a piece of paper in his mouth. And that paper said "follow" with the monster scribbled on it and these tentacle things coming out of its back. I then heard a whisper in my ear saying, "Run, or I'll kill Sean." I told Sean I heard the whisper, and he said, "What are you gonna do?" But then replied, "It told me to run or it'll kill you." That's when Sean said, "Don't go." He said, "It's just trying to split us up and it's trying to trick you." So then I had stayed, and we wandered for about 15 minutes when Sean said, "It's the road." We had made it back to the road by the school, but in that moment from behind, Sean was grabbed and quickly torn apart, and blood splattered all over me. I quickly ran to the road, and a car slowed down. I had just enough breath to say we were attacked. They drove me to the hospital, and my story was told to the police. It was even then on the news. Of course, they didn't believe me that some tall man killed us, and they just said that it was a bear attack. But none of my friends' bodies were ever found, and to this day, I sometimes get the feeling of being watched.